All right. Good morning, Doug. We're back to talk about war and specifically some of the interesting things that are happening in Europe right now. But first, I guess you have something from the Great Encyclopedia Britannica.
I do, and I might draw our listeners' attention, or viewers in this case, attention to the fact that I've got on a warlike T-shirt today. I just picked it off the top of the pile, and it turns out to be kind of greenish khaki, which is the color that Zelensky prefers to flaunt when he's trying to look like a genuine full military leader. So it's totally coincidental, incidentally, that this T-shirt was just on the top of the pile. So anyway, yes, and talking about the Encyclopedia Britannica and what they have today, there were no articles on Black History Month or Black people today. So I guess they've kind of scraped the bottom of the barrel of, American Blacks that have changed the course of history. And the featured biography that they're offering today is of Constantine I, the Roman Empire. And Constantine is most famous for having basically cemented Christianity in as the official religion of the Roman Empire. He didn't illegalize pagan cults, but he did a lot of things to make Christianity the official religion. And, people have asked themselves, well, Constantine converted because at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he saw a miracle and they won the battle, and he decided to become a Christian because of that, or because his mother, was it St. Helena, converted and she was always beating on him to convert. Well, maybe, but other explanations of it that I think are more credible, considering that Constantine was really a warlord. Frankly, that's what he did for a living, was be a warlord. He found that the Catholic Church had, over the years, established a network throughout the empire of bishops and priests that were herding their flock. Now, their flock at the time of his conversion, it's estimated, nobody knows for sure, was at most 20% of the residents of the empire were kind of Christians anyway. But the thing that would have attracted Constantine is that the Catholics had doctrines that you had to believe, and you had to do what you were told. If you didn't listen to your bishop, you might burn in hell for eternity. And conventional Roman religion with the old gods had nothing like that. I mean, they had no priesthood of any type that would dominate you and tell you they didn't have a concept of hell burning it for eternity, none of this stuff. So my guess is, since they already had the infrastructure there, the church, that by co-opting it and making it a state religion, which could boss people around, Constantine found that this was very helpful for unity, especially since he controlled the church. Anyway, a little bit of possibly alternate history on the fact that Constantine, did he die or was he born today? Well, I'm not sure, but we're talking about, I guess it was the Council of Nicaea, where they formulated the things you're supposed to believe as a Catholic or a Christian. They were the same thing back then. And he died shortly thereafter. So anyway.
So it sounds like he may have had these inspired conversions to faith, but probably some practical he wanted the management apparatus. That can't hurt.
That's basically the deal. Rome did not have a religion that lent itself to controlling people. I mean, it was a Zeus did not give orders and tell you what you were supposed to believe or not. That didn't happen. So Christianity was very, very helpful. And incidentally, at the same time, because previous to that, Christianity was a religion of peace and Jesus turning the other cheek and so forth. It was a pacifistic religion. Christianity increasingly became integrated as it became integrated in the state. You became a Christian soldier and you had to rationalize going out and killing and fighting other people. So it was a major change for both the church and the state with Constantine.
Right.
So today,
and it's still rationalized.
It's still rationalized.
Good
Onward
and
Christian
evil.
soldiers, right?
Yeah, it's almost like every battle we face is the evil going against the evil character of Saddam Hussein, or now it's Putin, right? It's got to be put in this cast of good and evil in order to get people to move.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, even in these conquest games, I think of the names of them. They often put a priest in there as a character who's very powerful, because if you can control your soldiers' minds and the enemy's minds as well by offering them the reward of eternal bliss or damnation, psychological warfare is an important thing. And Christianity lends itself to that much, much more than the classical religions did.
That makes sense.
Anyway, that's one thing from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Another thing is that this is the anniversary of Wounded Knee 50 years ago, when the American Indian movement took over a little hamlet and stood off the police for, I think it was a couple of months, something like that. That happened today. I could actually check if I haven't already closed the encyclopedia. This day in
1973, I think.
1973. And I probably wouldn't have followed that too closely, except I got to know Russell Means, the kind of reasonably famous actor who was a full-blooded Sioux Indian. And he came to a conference I put on for years in Aspen. And I got to know him, and we hung out together for a couple of years. And well, for what it's worth, Russell took, it's just like being a Black today. If you're of a certain psychological set, you're supposed to take being Black seriously. That's your identity. Well, for Russell, being an Indian was his identity. That was his deal. And it was very annoying, because it made it hard to have a conversation with him, because he had a chip on his shoulder. Everything was about white men and Indians, or at least it was under the surface. So anyway, that's my contribution from the Encyclopedia Britannica. What are you thinking of?
Well, I think Nick Giambruno published today on International Man. He published an article, coincidentally, like you wearing your combat fatigue T-shirt today. It was very coincidental. I was thinking about this morning, and what his article was about was saying that we're in World War III, and in fact, World War III started a decade ago. And he goes through and he makes the case about what's going on, and it's on International Man. I encourage people to go check out the article. I'll link to it in the description. But I was thinking about that in parallel this morning, and posted on Twitter about almost the same minute. I think he published his article, and it was I was thinking, it does seem to me. Well, my question was, when we look back, what is the date we will set for when World War III actually began? And I say that because the official story in World War II is that World War II began when the Nazis, when Germany invaded Poland. And that was the kickoff in 1939, I guess it was. for Americans, it didn't really start until after, we induced, provoked Japan into attacking, Western assets in the Pacific and at Pearl Harbor. But started then, and I was just thinking, I think the official story, and when we get down the road, will be as simplistic as it is for World War II. That in fact, what happened is that World War III kicked off when Putin invaded Ukraine unprovoked. And it's so much more complicated than that. And it seemed like it was losing steam last year, but it seems to have regained some traction. And it's which is very concerning to me. So that's the biggest thing I wanted to talk about. And there's a couple different aspects of it, but I guess first of all, what's your general take on it and World War III?
That's a good point, because fact is that for a while, everybody was wearing Ukrainian flags and putting them on their lawns and stuff like that type of thing. And then for the last few months, that all died down. The Ukrainian, as they were losing the war badly, which they have been, and losing. I guess the most recent thing I saw is Zelensky said they've lost about 35,000 soldiers. That impresses me as a lie, because what I hear from independent military sources is that the Ukrainians have lost, well, deaths or serious casualties. We're talking 300 to 500,000 are the numbers that are banded around. That's a difference of like 10 to 1.
Yeah,
So
well, even Ursula von der Leyen said in a speech 6 months ago that Ukraine had lost 100,000 soldiers. So, Zelensky is not a credible source on anything. That's
no,
impossible.
not on anything. I mean, and well, what does he care? I mean, the Panama Papers revealed that he was worth about $500 million, something which nobody talks about. And so he'll be just fine for the rest of his life. He really will. But that's funny what you're saying about in Nick's article, that World War II kind of started slowly, indications it was starting with the Spanish Civil War, where the Germans got to try out a few weapons and some tactics because they were a little bit rusty, hadn't been in a war for 20 years. That was kind of the first thing.
Mhm.
And then after the Germans invaded Poland, trumped up something. Everybody talks about World War starting then, which it did. Nobody mentions that our allies, the Soviets, invaded and ate the other half of Poland 15 days later, September 1st and September 15th, roughly. So these things kind of start slowly, and since truth is the first casualty in war, it takes some research to find out what was really going on.
Right. Well, and also from an economic standpoint, there were acts of war that were happening before, including all of the sanctions on Japan that Roosevelt implemented that basically really painted the Japanese into a corner. I mean, they were a huge trading partner of the US, and they cut off first, of certain like manufactured goods, and ultimately cut them off from oil altogether, and then made it forbid anyone else in the Asia Pacific area, Dutch companies and so forth, to sell them oil. And so that was happening. Then we were doing the Lend-Lease program for both the Chinese and for the Soviet Union and the UK before we
That's
declared
right.
war.
The Flying Tigers were over there, and that was rather provocative for the Japanese, with American pilots flying American planes with Chinese markings on it. Yeah, there's always a lot of stuff like that going on. And when the war did start in September, the first part of it, the Germans called it the Sitzkrieg, and the West called it the phony war, where they didn't do anything for the next. When did the Germans invade France? But it was like 6 months later.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe longer than that, actually. But yeah, there was a long period. There was this big period of time where even at that point, the war is officially now declared, and yet there wasn't any fighting. So, and I think that's kind of the state we're in now. I mean, the war is not officially declared, except for I guess the Houthis, have declared war on Israel. But other than that, there's not like war declared. But why would you, if you're in war, why would you want to declare war? It's not a prize fight where you have a referee saying go. It's like you're trying to position yourself and get ready and get some logistical advantage or economic advantage or something in advance of and until you cross a line that you cannot return to. So you want to delay, you want to be careful.
Yeah, and the Houthis kind of had their day in the sun, but I think they're going to stay in the sun, frankly, because I think they're still scaring away traffic from the Red Sea, and the Americans are still bombing, mud huts in Yemen. And the Houthis are used to this because the Saudis were attacking the Houthis for about 10 years beforehand using American weaponry and killing a fair number of Houthis, but not really doing anything except making them really, really pissed off.
Yeah. Well, apparently the most recent thing they've done, I mean, the Houthis haven't taken credit for it yet, but some undersea communications cables that connect Africa to Europe, I guess, have been cut that go through the Red Sea. They've cut some communication cables, fiber optic lines.
Yeah, and I guess the main thing with the Houthis now is to attack, well, they can't attack Israel, but they can attack people with shipping things through the Red Sea that are allies or perceived as allies of Israel, but they still hate the Saudis. And when you're talking about, tough mountain fighters as opposed to soft and corrupt Saudi military, I wonder if the Houthis will try to, if Saudi Arabia becomes friendly enough with Israel, that if they'll decide to take the show on the road and conquer Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis have all these high-tech weapons they bought from the Americans, but my understanding is their military is just totally crapped. Just a bunch of, soft Saudi guys that are looking for a free ride with a salary in the military. Anything can happen. These things can spin out of control.
Well, and it does seem, as I said, we diverted from Europe, where it seems like I guess it kind of shifts from the main theater. Like the focus has been Ukraine for so long, and then obviously it switches to Israel and Palestine, and things, do not seem to be resolving themselves there. But while it seemed as things were resolving themselves in Europe, at least where like Russia was clearly winning, it seemed, and that a negotiated peace would have to happen, like that Ukraine would have to do something. Lately, the narrative shift, first of all, where it went from in Europe, people saying things like kind of downplaying the real risk to greater Europe from Russia, but saying we needed to support Ukraine, to all of a sudden it switched to this, that Russia is a existential threat to Europe. And in fact, we might have to start conscripting people because we're going to be going to war with Russia. And lots of European nations, heads of state and military leaders were coming out saying these kinds of things. And at the same time, these European countries start signing these bilateral security agreements with Ukraine. And now starting with UK and Germany, now Italy has signed one, France has signed one, Germany signed it, Canada, Denmark. It's expected soon Bulgaria, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Norway will also sign them. And that's an interesting switch. I mean, where it seemed like the war was decelerating, now all of a sudden it's given a lot more new life.
Yeah, NATO isn't signing a treaty with the Ukraine, but all of the members of NATO basically are signing treaties with Ukraine. And you've got to ask yourself, wait a minute, if the Ukraine's actively engaged in a war, why sign a treaty after the fact? It's not going to prevent anything. It's like looking for an excuse with
Right.
all the rest of these things.
Yeah, they're just trying, it's like they're creating the legal framework to, justify their actions. And the thing it's missing is the big event, like a Pearl Harbor type of event that shifts the public's attitude and makes them eager to go to war.
Yeah, well, you might have to fabricate one of those because, you know, I it's very hard in the psychological climate we live in today to support the Russians. But as we've talked about in the past, looking at this as objectively as I can, and of course, it's not that the Russians are blameless, but an objective observer would have to say those Russians were really and mightily provoked and painted into a corner, much the way the Japanese were.
Yeah, and they at least come off as rational actors. And I don't think that you can say the same for the West.
No, and it was very good. I thought that interview that Tucker had with Putin. Putin came across as being thoughtful and forbearing, interested in history, not looking for trouble, trying to explain himself. And I'm not, any mention of it in the Western media portrayed him in the worst light possible.
Yeah, and I supposedly it has I don't know, hundreds of millions of views. People have seen it. It's hard to imagine, though, in the TikTok generation that many Americans could sit through that that whole conversation because you could see in it Tucker getting frustrated, and I at times could feel it myself. I'm like, do I want to keep watching this? Like, is it just like nothing's happening? I'm learning stuff, but nothing's happening. I'm waiting for something, and I did listen to the entire thing, but and I'm glad I did because what it did is it gave you at least I had two different perspectives, two things I took away from it. One is that his just entire worldview is so fundamentally different than the Western view. Like he can't even, it doesn't seem as though he can even think about the current scenario without a whole layers of context that we want to ignore. We want to know we want to know the punchline. We want to know, just summarize in bullet point form for us, kind of thing. And it's like I don't know if he can't think like that, or that he just wasn't thinking like that. But that came through. That just thinking differently about the whole thing. And then it was weird how he was held in confidence all of these private conversations he had with different world leaders. And he said, well, that was private, so I'm not going to talk about that. And that's just so not the American way. Like we talk a lot about everything. I mean, rumors and innuendo. I mean, we like to tell people before we're going to bomb them. I mean, it's all out there.
Yes, especially the higher ups in the current administration, like Victoria Nuland and actually all of them. Uh, they're, well, I'm glad that John McCain, who impressed me as nothing other than an angry chimpanzee hooting and panting, bomb, 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 Iran, things like that. Well, these people are all that mindset. And it's actually criminally insane because we're talking about the possibility of a war that would destroy wholesale civilization, what's left of it.
Right. And even if it doesn't escalate to that, talking about hundreds of thousands of dead young men that have been sent to the meat grinder in trenches like World War One. I mean, it's insane. Like, who can
Yeah,
support these things? I don't understand it.
I don't know. If we have another Nuremberg, well, of course, after this war is over, it'll be held by the victors. But if the West loses, I think most of the politicians and generals in the West will be the ones on the docket, frankly.
I
The
think
Russians are not looking for this war, and they're not looking to conquer more territory. They've got plenty of territory.
right. Exactly.
In
Yeah.
fact, their problem in the years to come is going to be defending Siberia against the Chinese. But wait a minute, maybe not, because the Chinese population, it appears, is in terminal collapse, where estimates are made that by the year 2080, which is, well, actually not so far from now, that the population of China will have fallen to 500 or 600 million from the current 1.4 billion.
Won't be too much. Yeah, they'll have plenty of space if that's true.
Yeah. Well, I think the world's on the point of a major change.
Well, I think so too. And that also relates to the World War idea, in that the whole world order was remade after World War One, and it was remade again after World War Two. And with things like the Great Reset out there, ideas like that, if you really want to remake the whole world, nothing can do it like a world war.
Yeah. I mean, it's even better than COVID. I mean, frankly, maybe, well, it's definitely even better and a lot faster than faux global warming to change things. So,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, one other thing about that is was worth mentioning is Moldova, just because maybe you can help people understand with Transnistria what that's all about. But there's Moldova at the same time as Ukraine in, I guess, maybe it was November, was green lighted to become an EU member, begin this process anyway. So which of course they hadn't met the requirements they were historically would have made to be able to qualify for it, but both of those countries at the same time. And I think that's important because, Moldova is like wedged between a NATO country, Romania, and Ukraine, and then wedged between, and part of Moldova is a little sliver of Russian-controlled territory called Transnistria. And it almost seems like to me that the ascension into the EU is part of the deal to get them to kind of go along with what what NATO and Ukraine, what they're trying to do. And so I think that Transnistria area could be another source of major conflict in the coming.
yeah, because Transnistria is not part of Moldova as far as they're concerned, but it's not recognized by any Western countries.
Yeah, I was looking on Google Maps this morning and it's not there. I mean, it doesn't exist as anything, a separate political entity of Ukraine.
You know, the Transnistrians know they exist, and I know. Well, this is the problem. All we really know about what's going on in the corridors of power and on the battlefield is what we're told. Frankly, I mean, we don't have any firsthand information, and these horrible people control the information that's fed to us. So it's we have to kind of interpret the fog of war is making it very hard to know what's going on.
Yeah. But these bilateral security agreements can't be a good sign. That's for sure. There's no way this
Very
ends.
bad sign, very bad sign. We're moving into the out of the Spanish-American War prelude into the Sitzkrieg prelude, and then something could happen. Maybe it'll be a cyber attack to start with that's really serious. From which side, whichever side, who knows? Or maybe a third party. You just don't know.
You don't know, and you wouldn't know once it happened. That's one thing about it. You would not be able to, you would never even know how you were, like, who, you'd have to rely on experts to tell you who even attacked you.
Yeah, and whatever happened to those dozens of biowarfare labs, which are said to have been in Ukraine, operating for the US, but they can't operate in the US because that would be the violation of a treaty. So what's happened to those labs? Well, nobody says. At
Yeah, we
least I
don't know.
haven't heard anything.
No, they've been pushed aside. There's been no detail about them beyond Victoria Nuland's admission in front of the Senate. I think it was in front of the Senate, that actually they existed. Like she I think made an error in communicating. She wasn't, but she did admit it. So there was that, and then there was I think it was the New York Times recently talked about that there were 18 CIA bases in Ukraine.
Hmm.
Uh, So just recently so clearly it was an unprovoked attack by Russia.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, if the Russians, or forget it, if the Chinese had been doing equivalent things in Canada or Mexico, would the US have reacted? Yeah, probably pretty much the way the Russians did.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. We'll be back in a couple of days with questions from members of the file and viewers.
Okay, fantastic. And then we have another weekend. And thank goodness nothing ever happens on the weekends. Or does it? Pearl Harbor was on a Sunday. No, strike that.
Maybe we'll get our moment. Yeah, who knows? All right. We'll talk
Okay,
to you later. Thanks.
thanks, Matt.